What has happened when you look at what has happened around the world is that you've seen an escalation in online hate speech, particularly since 2016. And it's quite extraordinary. It doesn't matter where you go, whether you look at the work that's been done by Hedaya or the work that's been done by the Anti-Defamation League, it's the same message. And that is on year, there's been an escalation in the amount of hate speech that is available. And of course, the factor that's changed really has been the possibility of the internet. And I would just like to invite all of us, whatever we do in our daily lives, we must understand that the world is changing enormously because of what the internet has done to it, and that there's not only a technological transformation, that there is a philosophical and a political transformation that's happening. The problem is not free speech. The problem is an excess of information, and the growth of that information has privileged opinion over fact. So that the second part of what's happening is that the volume of material has just increased. And so the world that I do research in, my first book on the far right in New Zealand was published in 1987. And what's happened to that world of hate is that it has expanded as the internet has expanded. So it makes it very much harder to reach a consensus unless we can talk to one another. Because if our conversations are mediated by the internet, then we're in some trouble. Because not only has the internet and the world of the internet, the digital world, not only has it increased the possibilities for extreme groups, but it's also increased other things, the degree of scepticism. There is often a low level of trust in our core institutions, including the media. So we have these very alternative information sources, and I'm putting quotation marks around that, in which there's no moderation.
The fabric of New Zealand society is changing, as it always has, and there will be consequences. But as tensions around how we approach the future inevitably arise, the bigger political question we're now facing is, what kind of attitude are we going to bring to that? Hope or fear? Because how we respond to the challenge will depend on how it's framed.
Western societies, who have over the last 20 years seen a very substantial decline in birth rates, will very soon all be competing for migrants, because they'll need the workers and they'll need the taxpayers to pay for the benefits that the elderly will need. So we're in this transition period when people are nervous about immigrants. They think they're taking jobs, putting pressure on infrastructure. But really, we should be very welcoming to immigrants, because they are our future in terms of this country and many other countries.
We should look at the number of people granted permanent resident visas. And here's what that looks like over the last 10 years. Pretty much 45,000 people coming to live in New Zealand every single year. That's roughly 1% of the population. How did we arrive at the 1% target?
It's something that we share with Australia and Canada. It's 1% of population.
And is there some rationale for that, or is it just, well, they're doing it, so it seems like a good idea?
It's a good idea. They've done it, and I think we should do it.
But why do we need this 1% at all?
Essentially, we're ageing with nobody to help provide labour in the society. It's a question that I always ask, who's going to wipe your chin? So one of the things that's going to happen over the next decade is the numbers over the age of 65 are going to double, and we've got things like a dependency ratio. Now, when I was growing up in 20th century New Zealand, the dependency ratio was 4 people in paid work to 1 dependent. Currently, we're heading towards a 2-to-1 ratio.
2 to 1?
Yes. So we've got to balance that out. And the way that we're doing that is by encouraging immigrants who are going to contribute economically to the country.
If we want to keep getting superannuation in the future, some experts think part of the solution means letting even more tax-paying immigrants into the country. But will they be contributing enough?
Well, let's look at some of the overall makeup of the population as it stands now and as it's set to come from this data. So European New Zealanders or Pākehā New Zealanders will grow in size, as you say, but decline as a proportion of the population. In fact, probably not too far off being less than 50% of Auckland's population. How far off?
I think that's quite soon, actually. That's one of those tipping points. So they'll become what we call a majority minority. So they're still the largest group, but they'll be less than 50% of the population.
Do they have a mandate to... No, sorry. I'm sorry.
Precisely.
That's been an interesting debate, hasn't it?
It has been a very interesting
when you're the
debate.
biggest, but you're not the majority.
No. And it's one of those things, Catherine, that it's sort of dawning on us how diverse we are and what do we need to do. And I think that's an interesting discussion, which is still...
We'll come to it.
Yeah, we'll come to it.
All right, so that's what's happening with the Pākehā, or the European Pākehā population in Auckland. Nationwide, is it on a similar track?
The same. Much the same.
Māori and Pacifica peoples then, as you say, probably growing as relative proportions because of quite high fertility rates.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Māori will hit 1 million in the not too distant future.
All right. Any other standout changes to the numbers or surprises to you in the numbers, or simply that the expected deadlines are coming forward because, particularly with respect to the immigration numbers?
Population growth. And the context is, just to remind your listeners, is that we're growing at 2.1%, which is high.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers of Asians, they're growing at 3.5%. So that's why they're contributing.
Yeah.
Pākehā are growing at less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
So that's why we're seeing this diversification.
Right. And it's also in some ways the argument for immigration, isn't it? Because you're going to need workers, you're going to need taxpayers, especially as that baby boomer demographic retires. We know there's some big issues coming up there.
Okay, so I want to start with this New Zealand Institute of Economic Research's suggestion that New Zealand should have a population of 15 million by 2061, because this is the argument that people keep coming back to me with. Okay, so if we were to assume that the birth rate, 2.1 births per woman, is what you need to replace the population, if that remained constant, we push life expectancy at birth up to 95 years, and that's Stats New Zealand's highest assumption, and we give it for both males and females. We increase annual net migration to 100,000 a year. Normally it's around about, the medium variant is about 12,000 a year. If we keep the age structure of migrants very youthful, notwithstanding what I just said about the fact that we'll be competing on a diminishing pool, and migration positive at all ages, so that instead of what we usually do is we lose young people and we gain people at ever so slightly older, like middle ages. We keep it positive at all ages. Our 2061 population would be 10.8 million. And 22% would be over the age of 65. So it's really bigger population, not much difference in terms of the actual ageing. And if you happen to read the NZIER report, they point out right through it the impossibility of achieving the possible target population of 15 million. So it's really important that you understand those things, because the debate, and I keep getting calls from the media about it, it's not about whether it's achievable, it's about where should they live. What will they be like? Who will they be? And, how are we going to manage this big population? And it's impossible. So it's much more important that we engage with the realities that we're dealing with, and that is the fact that there will be growth, but most of that growth will be at the older ages. If we wanted to get that 15 million population by 2061, and I tried various runs with my software, we'd want 150,000 net migrants a year. We'd have to keep the fertility rate at 2.1. New Zealand, as I'll say again in a minute, already has the highest birth rate in the developed world, so we would really be pushing it. Or we need the birth rate to get back up to baby boom levels, about 3.5 births per woman, and keep it, a more achievable 100,000 migrants a year. So you see the difficulty. It's really not possible. And it's not possible because of these inconvenient truths about population ageing. So, said that, actually highest birth rate in the developed world. Our global growth rate, as you saw, it's looking pretty good. We've got lots and lots of young Kiwis. They seem to be popping up everywhere. And in fact, be careful if you want to close any of your schools or have them closed on you. There's been a wee baby blip born since about 2002. It peaked in around 2008, and that little wave, I promise you, will actually get to intermediate school, you know, in about 5 years' time. They're just going through primary school now. They're very, very important. I actually have called them GNT, GYH. Thank God you're here, because they will arrive at the door of the labour market exactly at the time that the biggest cohorts from the baby boom, born around 1960, reach the age at which they start to retire. So that little baby blip is so precious, and we absolutely must school it perfectly and encourage it to stay here and let it know how, you know, how much we need it and value it and so on. And we shouldn't close schools on them at the same time as having to have an eye on the fact that we do have, you know, diminishing numbers coming behind them. So it's like, follow the demography. And, you know, I just don't know whether Hekia Parata actually does use it. You would think they do. You know, they've got entire armies of advisors at their beck and call. But according to some people who I know very well who know what goes on in there, no, they don't. So it is a bit of a worry. Okay, so I've already said we are a very young country globally. We had the longest baby boom in the world, in the developed world, and the highest peak birth rate, and that is why we are one of the youngest developed countries today. But you can see how much we've changed since 1961. So there's me, and a few of you, I can see you in there, and you can see by how much the population has aged, and these changes are just unfolding, you know, unless you put them into graphs you can't really see them. Whoops, where are we? Okay, now, the important point, I'll just roll these numbers. Oh, something's happened. I made this slide, would you believe, on my little Apple AirBook, and it does not like the other programs, so it's not going to show what should be shown. These are the age groups, 0 to 14, 15 to 24, 25 to 39, I think it is. Anyway, the top one is 65 plus, and this is the working age population. So you can see that it's not really going to grow very much. It grows a bit, as Ross pointed out, but as a proportion of the total population, it declines from about 66% at the moment to 60%. There was a lot of good stuff on that slide.